Welcome back to episode 2 of Wahine Wealth Club. And today we are excited to have our first guest on the podcast, Kathy Fujiwara.
Hi.
And we are very excited to get to chat with her today and hear more about your story, Kathy, and how your history and all of the things you're doing align with Wahine Wealth Club.
Sounds great. Thank you for allowing me to be here. I'm super excited and also nervous. First podcast for me, but
It's gonna be great. You're going to kill it.
Yeah, hoping to share my story.
Yeah, thank you, Kathy. I'm so excited to get to know you more as well and hear your story. But before we dive in, today's episode is brought to you by United BJJ Hawaii. United BJJ is more than just a gym. It is a community. And here you can build not just strength and confidence and real-life skills, but also having this community inside of the gym, people who can lift you up. I know I can speak from experience that my husband and I, we own the gym and run the gym, but we benefit from the community just as much as our students. And so we want to promote a special offer just for the Wahine Wealth Club listeners. We have exclusive women's-only classes in no-gi grappling and in traditional Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And so we want to offer 10% off for women's classes for the first month. So you can go ahead and check out the website and schedule at unitedbjjhawaii.com.
Awesome.
Nice.
Thank you so much. Alrighty, so today, like I mentioned, we have Kathy here with us, and Kathy and I go back quite a ways. We've known each other for kind of a while now, which, let me think about that. When did I meet you? I think it was in 2016, 2017?
Really?
I think so.
Wow.
2017. That's when
Wow.
Yep.
Okay,
so
yeah.
we've known each other for 8 years now, which is pretty wild to think about. A lot of life lived in those 8 years. A lot of things and a lot of changes. But when Angela and I were talking about the podcast, talking about the mission, the values, the things that we want to be able to provide to our community, the things that are important to us, the different pillars of Wahine Wealth Club, and we started thinking about who are people we want to speak with, who are people that we feel like embody that and exemplify that and can provide value to our audience. You were one of the first people I thought of, not only for the impacts that you've had in my own life personally, but also in the work that you do in the arena that you're kind of in life, where you are now, where you were before, all of the different life experiences. And so I really wanted to just be able to have you on today to share some of that, give some of those golden nuggets, some of that wisdom to our audience. So we're very excited and very honored to have you here.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I want to start just with having you share a little bit about your origin story, like your background, who are you, where are you from, and kind of what's brought you to this point today.
Well, I mean, the whole typical is I'm a local girl born and raised here, graduated from a public high school, trying to make my way, fourth generation Asian. And I really am still asking myself that question, like, who am I? That's a really important thing these days. I thought I knew who I was, and I thought I knew what was important. And getting all those degrees, certifications was what I thought needed to define who I was. But lately I've been thinking like, no, it's not really it, right? Because I kept chasing the next thing and the next thing and the next thing and moving the goalposts farther and farther and farther. And I kept feeling like I'm falling farther away from myself in that process. So yeah, it is really has been a discovery or a rediscovery of who I am, what's important to me. And I would say within the last couple of years, mainly maybe 4, truly, is kind of where I've set on this path to just kind of get to know who I am. What am I about? What do I want to be about, really? And find that way forward from that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I know you and I worked together in the job that I was previously in before I jumped into doing my own business full time. And Kathy's background is in HR for everyone that is, not familiar. Her background is in human resources and in developing talent. And you're very good at it.
Thank you.
And Kathy was someone that really impacted my life as a out of college, kind of not totally sure where I wanted to go, what I wanted to do in my 20s. She really helped me to be able to develop some of those things in the workplace. But then also, you were one of the first people that told me I should pursue mean training full time. I don't know if you remember that. But we had a conversation in Kathy's office where I was just like, I think very unhappy with what I was doing. And Kathy straight up told me, as the VP of HR, which is kind of like crazy that you did that, that she just told me, she was like, I think you should pursue it. She's like, I think you should do that because that's what you want to do. And that's something I really respect about you, is that you have and continue to be people first. And I think in a time and in like an environment where a lot of people say they're for other people, but their actions say otherwise. I think it's really important to actually find those people that are going to really champion for you. And I know that's something that you value strongly in your life. Can you share a little bit about how did you decide you wanted to get into HR, human resources? How was that? Where did that come from? Like, where was that?
That wasn't
how
a
did you
decision,
how
really.
did you get there? Yeah.
It was kind of like I fell into that. So at the time, I was working for my now ex-husband's family business, and it's a business that's really old, multi-generational, and they needed someone in HR. They had accounting doing HR, right? And that's how old this company is. And a lot of those legacy companies had that HR is purely an administrative type of department. And so I fell into it, literally fell into it. What was helpful for me at that time was I had worked in retail environments, I had managed people. And so those things came naturally for me, to me, in trying to help them, right? Do what they needed to do. I would honestly say that a lot of my management philosophy comes from playing sports, came from playing softball.
Oh, cool.
And really understanding what it was like to be a team player, what it was like to suck, really like suck, and try to actually contribute to your team in a way that you could, right? And continuously strive to do that. So I feel like a lot of what I've learned and a lot of where I think I'm grounded in comes from a lot of that time where you learn to put in the work, you learn grit, you learn that sometimes that's not enough, and resilience on whether or not you want to continue doing and throwing yourself over and over, and maybe you get better, maybe you don't, right? And in my case, I was at a point to prove. I hate to say, had a point to prove, and it wasn't just to me. I think it was for like my dad, right?
What was the point?
I think I really needed to demonstrate to my dad, like, I could do this. So my family came from a family of baseball players. And I was the only child to actually continue on in that. And I started really late. I started in 8th grade. And I needed to like catch up because a lot of these kids I was playing with started T-ball when they were little, right? And so I really sucked. And it's such a horrible feeling to know that, you're so behind in comparison to everyone else. And so I think for me, it was like, I didn't want to be there. I wanted to be able to be better. I wanted to be able to be relied on, I think. And so I just did the work. And I remember a moment with my dad, and he said, I will only coach you if you ask for it. And I said, well, I need help. I really suck. And he goes, okay, I will coach you, but you got to be coachable. And so for me, that I understood it as I need to take away lessons from all the things that he teaches me. I need to be open to the feedback and criticism, no matter how hard it is. I need to keep grinding over and over and doing repetitions to get to where I needed to be. And I did that. But I think that idea or philosophy just kind of permeated a lot of what I did in life and just kept plugging away at things. In hindsight, to some degree, I feel like there probably could have been a point where I had a bit more awareness to say, okay, enough's enough, instead of just throwing yourself out there and getting battered. But there is a lesson to be learned from that also. So
it's so interesting how like that experience being in 8th grade playing softball, like you're like, here you are like in your 40s still thinking about that
oh shit,
and like applying that to your life. Like it's so funny how those things like stick with you because I totally get it. Like I think I have a lot of like similar feelings with like growing up surfing with my dad. Like my dad used to take me out at 5 a.m. to go surf because he's an amazing surfer. And so he wanted me to be an amazing surfer. But he also taught me like in the most like hardcore way.
right?
And it was like, oh my God, this isn't even fun. But then that kind of like carries over to like, oh, I want to like make them happy, and I want to like make them proud and all of those things.
Yeah.
And it's like, here we are decades later, still like having that be like a driving force of like,
totally,
what you want to do.
I mean, part of it, you could view that as another form of like maybe even abuse and trauma, really, right? In the way that parenting was back then. Because nowadays, it would probably be viewed very differently. But I really felt like that helped me build the level of resilience I needed just for what life was going to throw at me. And then the grit to know like, hey, you got to get down and dirty. You got to hurt. You got to be in pain sometimes. And to figure out a way forward from that. I remember points where we're playing in a tournament and I had sprained my hamstring and I had that thing taped up and you just like, because you needed to be on the team, right? You needed to pull through so that your team could actually play. And you did what you needed to do so that you could actually play the game and help your team win.
Yeah.
And so you worried about what was affecting you personally till after. I remember after the game, I was like in tears. I was so sore. And my dad came over to me and he was like unwrapping my wrap and icing my leg and doing all those things. But yeah, those are memories that are so vivid for me.
I'm sure you have some of those.
I can speak to just of course like the sport, but then also having your parents so directly involved. Like I think you said your dad was one of the coaches. My parents both coached me ever since I was young in martial arts, and so pretty much as soon as I could walk, I was in the gym and in the coached by them. I wanted to ask, like, how long did you stick with softball?
I mean, I stuck with it all the way through high school. And the funny thing is, and I was actually, my dad told me, at our high school, if you made first team all-star, right, you would get a picture on the wall. And my dad was the pitcher. He was a championship pitcher for the baseball team back in the day. So his name was on the ball in the trophy in the gym. And I remember telling my dad, like, oh, I want to be in the wall. And this was like 9th grade, right? You remember me telling you this story? Okay. And he told me, and I remember vividly, we're driving to Milani. My mom is in the passenger seat. My dad's driving. I'm in the back. And I'm saying this. And my dad says to me, you'll never be on the wall. And then my mom was like, oh, honey, that's a really great idea. That's a great goal. And I remember thinking at that moment, I'm going to make you eat your words.
Wow.
Like that was the first thing to come to my mind was like, I'll show you. But that's kind of how I took the negative feedback into fuel.
Yeah.
Not to say that that's a healthy thing to do, but it was able to get me to where I am today.
Yeah, harness that.
And I recognize it now, like, oh, that's so messed up in so many ways, right?
Yeah.
But that's what, I think that was a way for him to not set me up for disappointment. That was a way he knew how to do it, was to kind of just squash the goal for me, not encourage me. But that really set forth me being like, okay, right? So I played all the way till I was a senior. My senior year, I was like, it wasn't even about that anymore at that point. Like I forgot about that a long time. It was just about playing as a team and doing well. And when you are on a team that constantly loses, you build a lot of character, right? And then it comes to the point where you start to go to playoffs and you start becoming competitive. And then it's a whole different ballgame after that too, because I really feel like you need to know how to fail to know how to succeed. And that's part of life, right? And that experience for me, although it was just a short amount of time in my life, really taught me a lot. really taught me a lot. And you really, for me at that point in time, it wasn't about what happened after. I did get on the wall. I
Amazing.
did
There
get
you
first
go.
in Europe,
Yes.
right? And but it wasn't about that at the end. At the end, it was just like doing the best I could for my team, showing up in the best way I could possibly be, so that we could actually grow and thrive and just be better.
Yeah.
It wasn't just about me at that point.
And I love that spirit of, no, I'm going to show you I can do it. Like, and I feel like, having that fire inside of you, and I had that same feeling as well. I mean, I don't know if it's a cultural thing or what. I have Asian parents too. When I got pregnant with my daughter, they were pretty much like, you're done, like, you're going to be a mom now and you're not going to go back to fighting. And I was like, no, I am. And so, I just encourage all of the listeners, all of the women out there and the young girls, like, no, this is your life and you have control over it. And don't let anyone tell you you can't.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I think it's also interesting too. You guys are both moms. I'm not, but you guys are both parents. And when you become a parent, so I've heard, a lot of those things that you process as a kid really like come to the surface because you're looking at the world through your kid's eyes now, and it's like a different experience. And I've heard that if you're not intentional with doing the work to make sure that you're being a present, intentional parent, you're just going to parent the way that you were parented.
For sure.
Yeah.
And that's just what you revert back to because that's what you know.
Yep.
And if you're not intentionally trying to do the work to say, no, I'm not going to do those things, or I'm not going to like carry that forward, that's just ultimately what you go back to because it's what was exemplified to you. Can you see that in your own life with your kids?
I absolutely did that. There were times where I'm like, oh my God, I sound like my mom. Or I just did what my dad did.
Yeah.
And you don't necessarily think it's wrong until you know that it had a negative impact for you, right? Unless your kids are willing to be brave and say like, I don't appreciate that. But I mean, not many kids can, right? That calls forth another kind of
The
courage.
self-awareness.
Yeah.
I
I honestly feel like that didn't really kind of manifest for me until my kids were in high school. And then you lose the ability to manage them in the way that you did when they were younger because you could just threaten, right? Like they were like obedient. Now they're not obedient. You're like, how do I get this kid to listen to me, or how do I get him to be motivated, or and so you try different tactics. And I think at that point it was a lot of like talking to them, not just from a parent perspective, but also just being more curious about them. And I think that's what I didn't have was, no, my parents talked at me. They didn't talk with me. And they didn't really get to know me. And this was a point in time for which I needed to learn more about my kids and understand them a bit better. My son, I still struggle with communication. I don't know if it's a boy thing. I'm like, okay, one-liners, like one words, or
You
like
gotta start dropping
word.
like Riz and those kind of terms.
Even then, he'd
you're
be like, "What? Like, what's wrong with you?" But my daughter and I, we can rap out for hours.
Yeah.
I mean, and even though she's away at college right now, I mean, she FaceTimes me and she's like, "What are you doing? Look, it's snowing. It's like full on snowing in Nebraska." But I guess if you make a decision to do something different, and when you make that conscious effort to do it, you start to continue to try to make progress in it. And it's not to say it'll work, but it's something better than what it was being done, right? And at least that's how I looked at it. And so I'm really trying to develop a relationship with my kids that was very different from what I had with them when they were little. They needed a certain kind of mom then, and I'm a different kind of mom now because it's a different circumstance, in my opinion. They're away at school, experiencing life. They're going to need a friend at times too, and I want to be a safe space for them to come to when they start to really have the hard knocks in life, because that's going to come if it hasn't already.
Yeah, I don't have teenagers yet. My daughter is going to be 4 this year, but I am dealing with the not listening, and it's taking a lot of different ideas to try and get through. And really, what I found, at least with her, is like the connection, like getting to have that connection, and she needs to know that I'm like there for her, whether she's listening or not. And, you know, above all else, like having that, because they're always gonna like need their mom, you know, up until some point, at least when they're developing. And, you know, connecting first and then trying to get through. But it's hard. I have to keep reminding myself, her brain is underdeveloped. Her brain is underdeveloped. I'm like chanting this to myself. I'm like, have grace. But yeah, no, it's for me, at least, the way that I grew up with my parents, and the way that I decide to parent my daughter now, yeah, no, very, very different. And a lot of it for me was, I guess, kind of like realizing that the things that happened to me did have an effect on me, and I didn't even realize it then. I thought it was just the norm, but seeing how it impacted me, because I'll react the same way of what my parents did to me, and I'm like, that's not good. I was like, oh, that did have an effect on me. That wasn't good for me when I was like young. And so I'm like, okay, acknowledging that, and then like, let's be different. But yeah, it's not easy.
Yeah, the
Oh,
let's
man.
be different part is calling forth a part of you that really has intention. And you got to be very disciplined about it, and then challenge yourself in those circumstances where you just want to revert to what is normal for you, to make that concerted effort to be pause. Okay, I need to do it this way. Like,
Yeah.
take a breath.
Yeah.
But that's hard because that comes a regulation of yourself, right? Yeah.
I think it also comes from not being so like overly busy and overly like inundated with life that you can actually have like that awareness to be
Yes.
like, oh my God, what am I doing? You know, like that
Absolutely.
quietness to be able to like have that internal dialogue. Because I think, I mean, I even experienced this in just regular communication with people. And like, I know when I'm like, my schedule is crazy, I'm tired, things are going on, there's like just a lot of stuff in my head, that's when you start to like snap. That's when you start to like have those moments of like, I don't have patience because
Yeah.
I'm not like taking the time and the space to be able to check myself. And I can only imagine that with kids. I mean, they're like you said, their brains are underdeveloped. They're, you know, with you all the time.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah.
I think, this is where you have to allow yourself a bit of grace too, because you're not always going to be perfect. I'm never perfect. I'm always striving to try to be better. But I remember a time in the workplace, I was very uncharacteristic of how I worked with a particular employee. I was very short and I was under a lot of stress. And after she left my office, I was like, wow, you really effed that up. It's like the first thing that came to my head was like, you really effed that up. Like, now what damage did you do in all the work that you've been trying to do? What damage did you do with this person? And so I reached out in Teams and I messaged her and I apologized and I owned it. I owned it and I said, thank you really for being a point of reflection for me to recognize that I need to be better. And in this case, I'm sorry this happened, and I will work toward not doing that again. But I think that's the difference also when you are just a person that values other people's feelings, but also in a leadership capacity. Because in this case, I was with both. I had both, right? That I'm managing was like me as an individual and who I am as a leader in the organization, and what I needed to stand for. Because, when you're a leader in an organization, you're not allowed to make mistakes. Yeah. There's very little grace for you. You're expected to be perfect. Yet, we make mistakes. And I think it was important for me at that time to recognize this is something I needed to own and how messy it was. And recognize like, hey, I'm human too. Like, allow me some grace in this too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's something I'm really curious about for you specifically, because you have such an interesting story of like going from like family business, kind of just getting thrown into this position of doing HR, all that stuff, learning, getting really good at it, moving, up the ranks, getting all these degrees and certifications, to being the VP of HR for a pretty well-known company, to being on all of these different boards to now doing your own thing. Something you touched on, I think, in that what you just shared is that ability to be a leader, but still being vulnerable and being able to take ownership over when you screw up, because everyone does.
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit more about what vulnerability and leadership looks like to you?
Yeah, I mean, it is very much about being honest with who you are and your capacity and your ability. I mean, it's hard when you feel like you need to know everything to be able to direct and guide the workforce. But it's another thing to say, you know what, we're going to try this and we'll see what happens. And I need your, flexibility and adaptability in how we navigate this together. And so I really think it comes from who you are as a person, what you want to stand for, and what kind of leader you want to be. And I know in certain circumstances, it was very much like in some of the things we did at work, right, Hannah? Like, I came with you with some crazy ideas, and it was like, hey, what do y'all think? And we just kind of threw it up there and like poke holes at it.
Kathy had this wall in her office that was these giant sticky notes that were just like the entire wall. And we would just walk in there and she'd just be like scribbling.
A mad woman.
Like, what are you doing?
We got to get some of those giant sticky notes up in here.
We should, honestly. Or just a chalkboard, whiteboard, something.
Right. I mean, and those were kind of the things that created the best results, and it's still like alive and thriving, right? Yeah, and it was a way to kind of just bring people together and think about something that we could all pitch in to share.
Yes.
And then build it for the rest of everyone else to benefit from, right? But I think in that it was me demonstrating like, hey, I don't know all the answers. I have an idea, and I think this is what we can do. What do you guys think?
Yeah.
Do you think this would stick? Right? Like you as the workforce, as the people, would something like this program be beneficial? Do you see how it can be beneficial? And in that part of just introducing something new, there's a shared learning around all of that too. Do you feel like you took away some learnings from that experience?
Oh, yeah, 100%. I think, it's something too. I think that the way I look at, there's like different kind of almost like generational ways that like, even like with parenting, right? Like the way we were parented is probably not the way people are getting parented now.
Right, for sure.
Like those kind of things. I think it also bleeds over into the workplace, like the way that things are structured, the way that people manage other people. There's like the old school way of doing it. And then there's like, kind of the way that people are thinking about it now. And everyone does it a little bit differently.
Yeah.
But I think what I really took away from that experience, there's good and bad in all of those things, all of the experiences you have in life. And so there are some really good things that I was like, I really like this and I want to carry this forward. And then there's other things that I was like, okay, I don't want that. That's not what I want. Something that I think was really, really like, I guess for me, kind of like sparked what was already there, but maybe just like ignited a little bit more was that entrepreneurial kind of like spirit, And I think you had a big part to play in that for me, as far as like pushing me outside of like what my quote unquote role was with the company of like, here's your job description, here's like, and you were like, well, what else do you want to do? What are you good at? And I think having someone like that to see those things in yourself before you see them is really important, especially when you're still young and you don't really know what you're good at. It's like you're trying to figure it out, and then someone comes alongside and says like, hey, like you seem pretty good at this. Do you want to try it? And you're like, I don't know, I guess,
Yeah. I've had to learn this, and that's a good point, because I always felt like there were opportunities. Everyone has opportunities for potential, but not everyone wants that potential. And you got to be okay with that. Even in a position that I was in trying to develop and cultivate a thriving workforce, my intentions were like, okay, help everybody accelerate and grow and perform, right? And not everyone wanted that. And I had to respect that. Some people felt like they were good enough, and rightfully so. But it comes to fine balance with understanding like, okay, you're here in a role. There are requirements of this role. And what you currently are at is lacking in that. So we need development. And it's a hard conversation to have, right? Because you want to respect people's boundaries and where they are. And you want to, I for sure am one of those people that were like, yes, by all means, yes, you are enough. But in here in this capacity, we need you here,
Yeah.
right? And so those are hard conversations to kind of navigate. But I think coming from that place of authenticity and humility, right, and understanding that level of compassion for that, that's when it's the most important. That's when it resonates the most in those tough kinds of conversations and situations. Yeah.
I have a question. I'm just curious about how you closed the chapter on your role there and then began the new chapter of like following what you wanted to do, starting your own company.
Yeah, that's a great question. It has, I feel like I never saw myself as being my own business owner. Never. Like that would never. I still continue to view myself as being a strong right hand for someone. And in a lot of what I was doing, I was being very strategic in what I was doing, which was very different for the company I was working for. We didn't have HR that was strategic. It was always very administrative, and I was able to get it to a point where we started to be a strategic partner. And I was starting to feel like I was outgrowing my position, my role there, my presence. So I was expanding beyond that, and I was very fortunate to have a boss who embraced that and was like willing to allow me to just kind of explore. And in that, it was like, okay, go ahead, let's try this. And it was a safe space for me to try to make mistakes and figure out if it was going to be something that was important to me. But what I really think happened was really COVID. COVID was a eye opener to really recognize, hey, your sole job could end in just a blink of an eye. And then what do you have? Right? I witnessed a lot of people in the workforce just have to rely on unemployment and struggle to find work during those periods of time. And they needed medical insurance on top of that, right? That was a really rough time. And for me, it got me thinking about retirement. And I was like, what am I going to do to retire? I want to be able to live a different kind of lifestyle, but still be able to contribute meaningfully. So it really took me to look at what do I have that would be of value? And that looked, I was like, well, obviously all the things I've acquired during this time, the skill and knowledge I have. And at that time, I was going through my MBA, and teaching kind of came up, and coaching. And this is kind of where I ended up going down this exploration process of like, okay, what's teaching going to be like? And early on, before I actually got into HR, there was a point in time where I was going to be a teacher, an elementary school teacher.
Oh, wow.
I know, scary, right? And I remember being like, this is so not for me. And so, that it comes up later in life, I thought, maybe it's something that was truly meant to be, right? In some capacity, teaching. Maybe not a teacher, but I'm sharing with others. And I had a professor that was super helpful, gave me an opportunity to say like, hey, go try, right? Be an adjunct instructor. And so I tried it and still do it. And it's a great way for me to see like what the upcoming talent looks like, right? In both the undergrad and the graduate level. And that's kind of how I dabbled in that space for a little bit during this, COVID lapsed. And then, we went into 2021, 2022. And then coaching kind of came up. And coaching was a very different understanding of what I had. Like what it is truly as to be a coach is very different from what I knew, because I knew it as like a sports kind of coach. And in some ways it's very similar. You have athletes who are trying to get better, and a coach in the way that I know coaching is very much like that. Although the workforce and organizations bring in coaching from a more remedial standpoint, which is not the case per se. That's HR's job, not a coach's job per se. And so I went through this process of just trying out this one coaching educational source and loved it. And I think it also was a healing point for me too, as going through my own personal transitions. That I found so much resonance with it. It was pretty amazing, and I never felt so challenged because of just the emotional bandwidth needed around it. It was like a lot. Like you think you deal with people on an HR level, like coaching and in this capacity is a whole other ballgame. It really is exhausting. And I was like, wow, the transformations and the impact you can have with someone through this mechanism is amazing. And so I went through that process of just going through the education. It was 6 months of education, 6 months of certification, and practicing coaching, and then testing, and got that. And now I do that executive coaching part, as and then I still do the teaching part, and I kind of take that teaching idea from where I'm teaching at to actually working with people, right? And helping them grow and learn and thrive in the ways that I can help. But that's kind of how I went through this path of trying to figure out like what I was good at. It was really about what happens if you no longer have a job? What do you fall back on? And so I had a good parallel period of time where I could experience both worlds. And then it came to a point where I just started to feel like I need to leave this world and sit more in this world. And I started to kind of make that transition slowly but surely. And it was scary, I'm not going to lie. Like everything you knew to strive for, to climb that ladder in a business and get there, it's like, holy smokes, right? And I'm sure you experienced this too when you just decided to say peace out, right? And well, you didn't just say peace out, but you know what I mean. And you
Professionally.
right. Right. But yeah, but I will say, just the other morning I woke up and I was sitting in so much appreciation and gratitude for just where I'm able to be today. Having my slow mornings, being able to be with much more presence and intention and purpose that I would like to have, that I want to be about versus what I have to be about. It just hits a little different. And I can say it was such an amazing feeling because I don't think I've ever felt peace like that. Like it made me wonder, like, what is this? Like, is this what peace is? Because I hadn't never really truly experienced that. I've always been in a situation of fighting, right? Like fighting for everything, fighting, or trying to push forward, but not ever feeling comfortable with just being and sitting in it. And now is the time that I get to do that. And I'm just like, okay, wow. Now I have to think about it in a way like, okay, you deserve this. Because that's the hard part is being able to recognize I earned the right to be able to do this because I put the work in to get to this point. There's just that part of me that has been cultivated with just patterns of behavior of wanting to say, okay, you got to keep doing stuff. You got to keep moving, keep going forward. But I don't need to move as forward as quickly as I used to. I can choose to ramp it up or I can choose to dial it back. And I think that's what I learned over such a long period of time, or what was absent for a long period of time, was that I was always at choice. And I just was unable, for whatever reasons, to feel like I could make those choices. And now I'm able to recognize I do have a choice and my choice matters. And I want to be more intentional about it. So I've been choosing to sit in that space more.
What do you think changed for you that made you feel like you had the permission to make that choice? Because objectively, everyone always has a choice.
Right.
But I think we don't give ourselves the permission to make that choice. What do you feel changed for you that made you feel like I can make this choice?
Well, I think a lot of things. I mean, just in the short period of time, there's been a lot of tragedy that I've experienced in my life and a lot of loss. And I think about it from a sense of like, did they really live life the way they wanted to live life? Or did they live life because they were the way that they needed to because they were obligated to, for whatever cultural kinds of expectations and obligations that may have been imposed or self-imposed? And I think that kind of created this questioning in my head, like, are you living life the way you want to, or because your parents expect you to do this? Like, do they expect you, I know they did, expect you to go to college, get a degree, get married, have kids, to build a house, right? And live that American lifestyle, whatever it may be. And I did that. I wasn't necessarily happy, right? It got me to where I needed to be, but I saw happiness as fleeting. So how was I ever going to be happy if I could never do all those things and gain happiness. And it came to a point of really understanding myself and honoring who I am, because who else is going to honor me if it's not me? And being able to say, you know what? Make that choice. Make that decision. If you don't do it, somebody's going to do it for you. And are you going to be able to swallow what happens as a result of that? Sometimes yes, sometimes no, right? But I rather take it on as like, okay, I will own my decisions. I will own my mistakes. And everything that up to this point in time in my life has led me to where I am today. And and it's not bad,
Yeah.
right? And so it's like, okay, well, why not give it a shot? Because I tried everything else.
No, I
What
think
else,
that,
you know?
what you did and how you took ownership is so important, because I feel like a lot of people in this day and age have that victim mindset of all of these things have happened to me, and they can't get out of that cycle. It's difficult, and like like you were saying about happiness is like, it's an emotion. It comes and goes, like sadness or anger, and it's not something that we should be chasing. Really, for me, I think like, if anything, what we want to be trying to attain is like a life of purpose and meaning, and like what's gonna really fill your cup, you know? And I guess that kind of leads back to what we're talking about here. Wahine Wealth Club is like, it sounds like where you're at now is a very wealthy lifestyle for you, and hearing about your slow mornings and your schedule. But then being an entrepreneur as well, we have the two sides of it. We have those days where we can make our schedule, but then also young people don't see that we have a lot of work that goes behind it. Sometimes we can't clock out,
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the idea of wealth, it was such a narrow view for where you're at, right? And for me, wealth is like what you guys are speaking about. It's all those things. Wealth, part of being wealthy is my ability to have freedom. Freedom to work when I want to work, with who I want to work, how I want to work with them. And that for me was like huge, right? Like no more driving in traffic, no more wasting 2 hours of my life sitting in traffic and being all upset and sitting behind a desk, right? That didn't necessarily pull forth the best part of me. It was good for a time, but like everything else, if you're not changing and growing, then you're stagnating and dying at some point, right? And I was always a person that always looks for learning opportunities and growth, and because I want to just be better and be able to do things a little differently than I did yesterday, is kind of how I looked at it. And I think when I was younger, I had really ambitious goals. And now that I'm getting older, I'm just kind of like, oh, I'll just simplify it, like dumb it down. Why did it have to be like so like this, right? And so it's kind of inversing in the way that I had viewed things before. This is going to sound silly, but backpacking, I think, really helped me just kind of realize that all I needed to survive was what I carried on my back. You had your tent, you had your water, you had your food, and that could sustain you for days. And so when you strip away all the material things that you acquire over a period of time, really what you need is just those things. And if you can live with just those things, that is wealthy. That is a way of looking at wealth. Because it also teaches you a lot of lessons too around that, right? The whole idea of backpacking, like for me, it was like climb the mountain as fast as you can. How long can you go, right? And just those things. But now it's like, well, let me take in the view as I'm going there.
I love that.
Yeah.
Before it was just about summiting the mountain.
Right.
Now it's about like, let me take a look at what's around before I get to the top.
I can totally relate to that. I mean, the journey being so much more significant than the destination. I feel the same way, like throughout my career as a fighter and a champion, and, getting to that top and like winning the belt and defending it multiple times. Yes, great. But at some point, it's like every little thing that happened along the way makes the whole experience that much more rich.
Right.
And not just the wins, the losses, experienced, the setbacks, the injuries, and all of that. I mean, it's not all great. But looking back on it, it's like, wow, it gives me so much more perspective now. And like, I learned so much through that, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think backpacking is like it's not my choice, not something I choose to do, but, I think it is like a really beautiful analogy for life, right? And like you said, like, okay, what can I fit in this bag that I'm going to need that's like for survival, and like figuring out the route I'm going to take, figuring out the way that's going to get me there without getting injured, without getting lost. You might still get lost along the way.
Right.
And then, finding that North Star of like, where's my destination? Like, I don't know anyone that goes backpacking just to like wander through the mountains, right? Like everyone has a goal that they're trying to get to. They have that North Star, but along the way, that's where people talk about. That's the part of the journey that people come back and they tell you about, like, oh my God, I was like at mile 15 and I ran out of water and then this happened and blah, 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 blah. And then like, oh yeah, the view was pretty cool.
Right.
But you hear about the journey, right?
Yeah.
That's really where the character comes into play. That's where you, I think, learn a lot about yourself. I think that's why people, are so into that, is because it really is like a
Who
moment.
came along for the journey too.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
And it's like, this is really hard.
Yeah.
But like, I'm doing it and I have this goal in mind of where I want to go.
And there's something to be said about taking the path that's already paved. That might not be a path that's yours.
Yeah.
Right? Sometimes your path is the one that's off the beaten path and you're bushwhacking, trying to figure out your way through. And in that sense of getting lost, there's lessons to be learned there too, right? Until you find your way back onto whatever paved road that you may find.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is very much the journey. And it took me a long time to realize that. You always hear it, right? You always see it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. And it was really until I actually literally like went through a process like that I was like, holy smokes, like this is not easy. Like carrying a 30-pound pack on your back and trying to trek up a mountain is not necessarily everyone's idea of fun, right?
Yeah.
But part of my ambition was just like the stubbornness too, right? Like I got this, or I can keep up with them, and that's what I mean. Like some of those things are not necessarily healthy to have, but yet also it was helpful to have. And that's what I'm finding now is like the things that have led me to where I'm at today weren't necessarily at one point I viewed as being like negative, like a negative pattern of behavior. And now I'm looking at it as a tool, knowing when to deploy that.
Yeah.
Like I tell my daughter this because she can be stubborn as heck. And I'm like, learn to use your stubbornness when you need it the most.
Yes.
Not about the other things, but if you are able to manage yourself in that way, you'll be like unstoppable, right? And sometimes we just let those things take hold of us and we become, victims to that.
Yeah.
And we're no longer in control as a result of that. But there's a way to flip that.
Yeah. If you use the analogy of life being like that backpacking journey and you have different checkpoints along the way, right? Of like different, like, okay, I got to this aid station. Okay. Now we're going to the next peak and then the next peak. And then like the end of your life is the summit. It's like the top of the mountain. What do you feel like that North Star is for you? And what do you feel like the next checkpoint in life is going to be for you?
I don't know if I'll ever reach that summit, to be honest. I think of it as a particular trail, and this is a trail out by Dillingham on the North Shore, because this one particular has like the switchbacks, and you get to a picnic bench and you can stop there or you can keep going. And if you keep going to the top, you overlook the Waianae side. But that has so many other trails that branch off that if you decide to explore, you can. And it can go through, this is where they do the hurt runs.
Yeah.
Right?
I know
what I'm
exactly where you're talking about.
Yeah. And so it can go on as long as you want it to be. And right now I'm like, I don't want to necessarily get to the top right now. I'm still having fun exploring and figuring out where to go and enjoying that process. And maybe I'll decide to stop and say that I summited. But I no longer feel the need to be at the top of the mountain to say I summited.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's kind of the perspective I have now. Before it was very much like I literally got to get to the top to say I summited. But now I'm like, you know what? That was enough. And I'm good with that. And I can say, okay, all done. Pack it up. We're out of here. Yeah.
I love that.
Me too.
And I think that's a really beautiful analogy. And I think it's a good reminder as someone that is as accomplished as you, like someone that has objectively from the outside looking in, someone looks at you and they say, wow, Kathy's really successful. She's done all of these things. She has all of these accolades. She's like made it, right? But for you to say like, I don't really care about the next thing, like the next,
Right.
like, you know, kind of notch in the belt, to say like, I'm enjoying the ride. I think people need to hear that, because I think there's a lot of culture out there where it's like, you have to be like going 100%, all cylinders, like, you know, the grind never stops, and like all of those kind of things. And there's seasons for that, for sure, when you're pushing for something, right?
Yeah.
I think life is full of seasons, and we all go through those experiences where it's like you're in fight camp. You're like, all right, I'm dialed in. This is what I'm doing for the next however many weeks. You know, you're like putting together strategic plans for an organization. You're like, okay, this is kind of like Hell Week. We're just going to grind this out. But like, that's not life. That's a part of life. That's a season, but that can't be the rest of your life.
Yeah. And you know, like when you're mentioning that, I'm trying to think like, when was that point for me? Because I was very much in the hamster wheel, like just running. And at some point I don't even remember, like I don't even feel like I was intentionally running on the hamster wheel. The wheel just took over with momentum, right? And I felt like there was a point for which I just couldn't achieve what I wanted to, and I didn't feel the way that I needed to. And that made me think about, and I don't know when exactly that happened, but that made me think about, what am I doing or what am I not doing that's still making me have the same results over and over, right? And I'm like, gosh, I need to do something differently. And what is that? And that was where I was like, okay, I gotta get deep into myself here and figure out like what it is. But I can't really pinpoint like an exact point in time where that was like a trigger, other than just knowing like, okay, enough's enough. I'm
I
kind of
remember.
tired. Do you
I remember. Well, not exactly the moment, but I remember a point. I don't remember what year it was, but it was when that hiker went missing,
Oh yeah.
and you were part of the search team to look for him. And there was a man that had gotten lost on the trails. Is that right? He'd gotten lost, and then you were part of the volunteer search group to go
He
look
didn't
for
get
him.
lost. He committed suicide.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
So that I remember that very vividly. You had been out searching for a few days, and then you came back in, and you were very shooken up by it.
Yeah.
You know, rightly so. But I remember that being kind of like an initial point that I recognized, and I was like, that's like, Kathy's like a little different.
Yeah.
And I think those moments when you're confronted so abruptly with life and with how finite it is,
Right.
I think I remember that being something I noticed in you was, Kathy is like a little different now. She's like looking at things a little bit differently. She's talking about different things, you know?
Yeah.
And I do think that realization, anytime you come across something like that, where you are like confronted with your physicality and
Yep.
your like humanness, because we forget, it's like, it could all be gone tomorrow, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. That was definitely a point. I remember, you know, when in the hiking community, it's small. And so when someone goes lost, you just kind of band together, right? And you want to help. And you're coming from a place of like, okay, let's bring this person home. You're not thinking about what you could potentially find. And in this circumstance, it was one of those things where we're like, we did not expect that at all. And I remember just being like taking over, like reactionary in that moment of just like, okay, call it in, like give our GPS location, just going, you know, I was able to work under pressure in a really good way. And I don't think it really hit me until like the next day, honestly.
Yeah.
I was just operating in the way that I felt needed to happen. And I remember the next day I went into work and I was really short with someone because they were complaining about parking or something very insignificant, okay? At least to me, given the largeness of what I was dealing with. And I remember going up to my boss and I'm like, hey, look, I gotta go. Like, I just can't be here. And I recognize I could do more harm as a result of not being like emotionally and physically available for others. And so I stepped away. And I think that was a really good point for me to understand my limitations, because I would have tried to push through it, being as stubborn as I was, like, I got this, I can deal with this. But I also knew I could hurt other people by not demonstrating the expectations they needed from me.
Mm-hmm.
So when my mom passed away, that was very much like, you know what, I think I could do this. But then I said, yeah, you probably could. You wouldn't do it well. So like, you know, why even chance it? At this point, just say, you know what, just take some time off.
Mm-hmm.
And my boss was like, by all means, yeah. Like, take your time off and deal with that. Because that's a lot more, you know, to deal with than anyone else can. But yeah, you're right. That was kind of one of those moments of like, what are we doing? This was a person that I didn't know personally. I came to know from his brother, help keep that trail maintained, lived, like, people in the community admired him, was well respected.
Mm-hmm.
And so the fact that he had committed suicide was very shocking for everyone. Like, no one could understand why. And I remember thinking like, wow, why would someone do that? But, you know, in hindsight, going through, and this maybe 2019, maybe?
It was a while ago.
Yeah, 2019. And I came to be friends with the family and those things. And I realized like, wow, that was huge. I also recognized during that point in time, I dealt with it differently from others. There's a part of me that I know in crisis pulls forward in being able to respond in an appropriate way. That's just like, there's a part of me in this. And while it was traumatizing for me, what doesn't happen for people who volunteer for search and rescue is there's no one to support them when they discover something like this. HFD, HPD, they have support.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, there were 10 of us. It was a team of us. And there were friends of this person in the search and rescue. So they had a way more of an impact in the way that we discovered him, right? Of course. And I was trying my hardest to try to figure out what kind of support we could get these people. Because, I mean, it was traumatizing for me. So just imagine what everyone else is going through. And I remember pulling forth like whatever resources I had to try to find support. And I was able to find some police chaplains who were willing to donate some time to us to come and put us through a process that they put the police officers through when they experienced these things. And it was almost like a week later, and I knew time was like important. So I kept pushing. But by that time that actually happened, where the chaplains came, I myself personally was coming through it already. Like, some of these other people hadn't slept for days. You know, they were still struggling. But I knew there was a part of me that had strength in this way. And there would be times where I was also going through a time personally of challenge also. And I remember hiking and having the PTSD affect me from witnessing that. And I was like, wow, this shit's real. Like, holy smokes. And I remember freaking out on the trail, trying to hurry up to get to my sister and my friend Jeff. And we're like rushing. And I thought, wow, I need to figure out a way to cope with this. And so, you know, as weird as this may be, and your brain does things to help you build up mechanisms for coping, right? And I would recognize that in times that I would be hiking and I would be physically or mentally challenged, I would call to him, the person who we found, and I would ask, like, I would speak to him. And I know that sounds really weird, but that gave me strength in being able to get through just whatever I was dealing with. I don't know. That was the kind of way I processed his passing, I think, and also to look to him as someone to support me through some of those challenging times. And, you know, now I can look back at it and be like, wow, like, that was super heavy and kind of scary at some times. But I was able to look on the brighter side of all of that than what we was like what we endured and found. Because I could have let that take hold of me in all the negative ways it could have. But I found a way to look through it in a way that helped fuel me to get through moments. And I think that's kind of a mindset that you may learn to cultivate through life. And maybe not, but that was something that I recognized in myself, that I had this ability to pull forward in times of devastation and scary moments like that. But I think that's just me. There's that survival instinct that kicks in, right? And that was a way of surviving, was like, okay, how are we going to get through all of this? This is all like so heavy. But yeah.
Oh no, thank you for sharing that. Actually, I lost my sister to suicide, and Hannah as well. And, you know, having you as a guest here, I had no idea that you had also, you know, experienced or knew someone who died by suicide. And, you know, it's just really scary how many people struggle and go through that. And not just those individuals, but people around who know them. And so for anyone who's listening right now, if you or someone you know is suffering or struggling, please speak up and reach out, because your life matters. And you can visit fightstory.org. You can text 988, and there's many resources. You can reach out to me directly. But, you know, I think that it's an important topic and conversation to be shared.
Mm-hmm. I didn't mean to bring it on so heavy. I'm sorry.
No, it's honestly, I genuinely forgot that's exactly what happened. I just remember you being very shooken up by the whole thing.
Mm.
And I remember you being very different after the whole encounter. And I don't know if you actually ever really shared with me what exactly happened. I just remember you were doing the search, and then you found him, and, you know, he was deceased, and you were very just different after that experience. And, you know, like Angela shared, it's something I think when you go through something like that and when you experience that yourself, you not only are confronted with the reality of how fragile we are, but also just like the struggles that people are facing that you just don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I know for you, being someone that works with people, being someone that's your whole job, human interaction, helping people, cultivating leaders and talent, is you're working with people.
Right.
And I think it's something that we just don't take a lot of time to really reflect on with other people, especially when we're all so busy. We're all so self-absorbed. Everyone's just doing what they're doing. Like you said, stuck in the hamster wheel. We're stuck in that cycle of just, here's what I have to do today. Just boom, 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 boom.
Yeah. I think, I think about it also that we're trying to respect people's privacy, right? Especially in the workplace. And I remember Judy. Judy caught me in the bathroom, and she was like, well, what the hell is going on with you? she needed to corner me to be able to get me to talk, because she knew something was up. She didn't feel like she could openly say it, but it went on long enough where she was like, okay, this is weird. And in this particular circumstance, it wasn't the tragedy that I suffered with, finding the hiker, but it was more personal. But it's also hard for us, in the organization to kind of be a leader in the organization, be in human resource, and feel okay or comfortable speaking with an employee about your own personal issues. It's hard because literally HR is kind of a very lonely place to be, because you don't have anyone you can really share with, right? You can only share, the rule of thumb is like you share up, which is limited for me, who I could share that with. And in this case, the people I could share up with knew also. But I also feel like they didn't know how to quite handle it. They were men. I was dealing with another issue. I was going through a divorce at that time. And so, you know, they dealt with it in the way they knew how, which is like sticking their head down and just kind of continuing doing their work, which is what I would have done, you know, in most cases too. I did have one colleague that made it a point to be like, hey, are you eating? Or like, he just saw that I was dropping weight quick. And he was like, you need to take care of yourself. You need to do this. You need to do that. And I totally appreciated that because I needed that reminder and I needed to know that someone saw me like that. Yeah. And I'm like, God, okay, I need to get my act together because if people in the workforce are noticing this, it's not okay. But that's the other thing. It was like, I felt the need to have to be a certain way. Right? Because that was my job, not necessarily to be fully me, not comfortable feeling fully me. So, gosh, I don't want to cry. For myself, I wouldn't cry on this thing. But yeah, that's kind of, you know, part of where I think there is a recognition or an appreciation of yourself to recognize like you are human. You're not just who you're expected to be in a role for other people. And the closer you can get to merging those two worlds together, the more you can feel more like yourself. And that the performance of what you're trying to do in both these worlds won't have to be so much of an act any longer. It can be who you truly want to be and are. And I try to express this in coaching because I feel like, especially for women, we're multitasking. We're mom, we're daughter, right? We're PTO parent, you know, running those things. We're all in many facets and we show up differently for every single one in a way to please people. And yet we're not necessarily pleasing ourselves. And at the end of the day, if we're not good with who we are, it's hard for us to show up in all those other places in the way that we continue to do that. And so I try to provide that perspective when I'm coaching others so that they can have this realization of like, I am doing this, because that's part of it. It's like no one realizes that they're actually doing this and it gets exhausting. And at what point are you going to say, okay, I'm tired? It's okay to say you're tired. You've been doing this for a long time. When are you going to do something about it?
Yeah.
Because you have all the ability to change it. But that's hard too. I get that. It's a process. Yeah.
No, I can totally relate to everything you're saying about just especially as females wearing many, many hats and always trying to be there for everyone. But just recently in the last year or so and had to say like, yes, it's okay and it's great to be there for everyone, but allow yourself, allow others to be there for you too, you know, because that's hard to do sometimes is allowing them in. And, you know, I think it's important we're all looking out for each other sometimes. You know, having, like you were saying, your colleague who kind of cornered you and brought it up, I'm sure that took courage for them to kind of go out and speak to you about that too. But sometimes that's what we need at that moment. We're hoping someone would. And as soon as we hear it, we're like, yes, you know, like that's exactly what I needed.
Right.
And so, you know, just thank you so much, Kathy, for being on here and sharing your story, all of your experiences and being vulnerable with us.
Thank you for having me. I had a really fun time. It wasn't so scary after all.
You did great.
It's just a conversation, and
Right.
you're very good at conversations. And yeah, just echoing what Angela said, very thankful for you to be a guest on here, but also personally very thankful for the impact you've had in my life, continue to have, which is fun to see. Like, you know, like I think we've both like gone through a similar kind of transition in the last few years. And it's really cool to see this next chapter for you and what that looks like. And I just can't wait to see where else you go and what else you do.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, we'll keep you noted. Right? Like you'll see.
Thank you. We do have a closing question that we like to ask all of our guests. What is one way that you have generated wealth in your life this week?
Oh, that's a hard one. It's always hard when I get questions like this. What is one way that I've generated wealth this week? I think it was more about, I think it has to do more about with being more intentional with people and the time with people. Like I feel like oftentimes in business, in business, it's transactions, right? Like you're just going through the notions of things. I think what I'm starting to do more of is deepen in a way that I hadn't before. Because it's about the connection for me. It's not just the transaction. If I get to work with you as a client, wonderful. But what beyond that is going to be impactful than just the services that I'm going to provide? Because I want to be able to do that, right? And I can't say that for everyone, but that's part of what makes my work fun for me is the connection building, and it's seeing how partnerships, right, like can flourish. I know someone who does this, and so let me recommend you to so and so, right? And seeing that little like this ecosystem start to grow and thrive, which I think is super fun and cool, as we're all trying to make our way forward. So I feel like that's kind of something that's I like to try to continuously do in the way that I'm able to.
Love it. Thank you.
Yeah.
And if you would be so kind as to leave a question on our lovely rotary phone for the next guest, can be any question that you want, just something that maybe sparks a conversation, maybe challenges the next guest, maybe just something that you are curious about. Leave a question for them, and then they will answer it on our next episode.
Okay. Hey, next guest. What are you going to do to build wealth with your circle of friends?
Love
That's
it.
a good one.
It's perfect.
That's a great one. Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you. Thanks for having
you.
me.